in the end, I was able to get her all put back together, and in honor of one of my favorite race car drivers, Sebastian Vettel, I believe that she deserves a name, so I would like to introduce everybody to Molly the Mule. Now, the first thing you're probably going to notice is that it sits a little bit higher, and the spoked wheels with the aggressive knobby tires. Now, I have done a full rally raid conversion on it, so that's new front fork internals and a new rear shock, along with tubeless spoked rims. Now, most owners that own this bike are not going to have any need for those modifications, and they're just not going to do it. So I'm going to leave all of the rally raid stuff to the very end of the video and carry on just with all the normal modifications that the vast majority of owners out there might be interested in. But I will talk about the tires that I put on, because I think that'll be of interest to anybody who wants to do any sort of off-roading. So I put a set of TKC 80s on it. The stock, I believe they were Dunlop Trail Max Mix Tours that came with the bike. They're just generic OEM tires. The majority of OEM tires are not very good, especially on a budget bike. So I wanted to do something that, again, was going to be able to take me off-road. This is a true 50-50 tire, so I went fairly aggressive. You probably wouldn't want to go any more aggressive and still ride it on the street. From my background, again, mostly sport bike riding and almost like slick racing type tires, I was really hesitant to go to a knobby. I had very, very low expectations for its rideability on the road. But I wanted to be able to go on, trails, off-road, whatever, and the more street-oriented tires just didn't give me the confidence that I needed. So I jumped in with very low expectations, and I gotta say, I'm quite impressed with the tire. Obviously, off-road, it does a very good job itself, as well as inspiring confidence, which is one of the bigger things. And on-road, it doesn't suffer nearly as much as I thought it would. So there is a little bit of chatter at lower speeds. You can kind of hear it because you got big blocky knobs rolling over the pavement instead of a nice smooth center contact patch like you'd have in most street tires. Once you go above, well, I don't know, 20, 30, that chatter sort of goes away. Now when you get to about 60 kilometers an hour, it does start to howl. It's not really, really loud, but you do hear it. It goes away once you hit about 80, the wind sort of overtakes it. So, I mean, given a choice, yes or no, would I want a tire that howls and chatters? No, I would choose no. But if that's the price that I got to pay to have a really capable off-road tire, it really doesn't affect my enjoyment of the bike or the rideability. So that's not really too big. What I was surprised about is in the corners, it grips really, really well. It kind of almost falls in. It must have a much different tire profile than I'm used to. It's a little sluggish, sort of in straight line with little movements. As soon as you lean it over, it just falls into the corners and grips really, really well. I've ridden it fairly aggressively, and I'm really, really surprised for a big blocky tire how well it grips on the road. Now, I suspect I don't suspect, I know that it's because it's a very, very soft compound tire. So the trade-off for that is it's going to wear very, very quickly, especially if you're riding it on the road. If you do want to do any sort of off-roading on your CB500X, I would suggest getting a better set of tires than the stock ones. If you're not planning on doing a considerable amount of off-roading, I wouldn't recommend this tire. You could probably get like a 70-30 or something like that. If you're doing any more than 50% of your travel on the road, you could go for this tire, but I think there's probably better options for you. But for what I wanted, I'm very happy with the tire so far. Now, probably the very first modification that I did was a radiator guard. I got a RNG radiator guard. That was very, very key for me. I put it on at about 700 kilometers, so when the bike was pretty new. I had done very, very little off-roading, and there was already a damaged fin. A stone or something had got in there and damaged the fin. So I would highly suggest a radiator guard. Just, I think, 3 bolts to put it in. It was really simple, and should give me some decent protection there. And notice I also got a pair of gaiters for the forks. More for the look than anything, just to kind of change the look. It will offer a little bit of protection, but I just thought it was kind of a cool, neat little addition to make it look more off-road worthy. Now, one of the more important modifications that I've done is the engine guard. So a couple things to be aware of when you're trying to take your CB500X off-road. So number one, it doesn't have a lot of ground clearance, so you definitely got to get something if you're planning on going off-road to protect the bottom of the bike. It also has the oil filter exposed right at the front here, so it's fairly vulnerable to anything sticking up or getting kicked up, and you definitely don't want to puncture an oil filter out in the middle of nowhere. And then the other one that is just inherent in the design of the bike is the motor is actually load bearing. So the motor isn't completely isolated from the frame, or in the frame I should say. So the frame comes here and actually bolts into the motor and then gets picked up back further on there. So the motor is actually stressed and is part of the frame. Most of the engine guards that I found didn't do a really good job of trying to isolate the motor. The Rally Raid one is the best option that I found to do that. So you'll notice that there's the frame and then there's a little bracket that it puts in. So the front of the engine guard bolts into a bracket that bolts to the frame. Now it does attach to the motor, so it doesn't completely isolate it. What I like about the Rally Raid design is at the bottom here, it bolts into the frame where you would have a center stand. So a lot of the other ones don't utilize that, and you can still use a center stand, which I don't want, I have no need for, and it's very heavy to carry around. But this actually bolts in there, so it does the best job that you're going to be able to do, in my opinion, from what I've been able to find, on a CB500X of isolating that motor and providing true crash protection for it. So fairly happy with that. Seems quite robust. It's got a nice little shield at the front here for the oil filter. I'm very happy with it. So one of the other modifications that I think is extremely important if you're going to be doing any sort of off-road riding is the foot pegs. The stock OEM foot pegs, they just don't do a very good job of anything other than resting your feet on them, riding on the pavement. As soon as you start to stand up on them off-road, you're going to notice they're very narrow. So one, it's just uncomfortable because you have all your weight on a much narrower contact patch if you're standing for any extended period of time. And also you don't have a lot of grip on them. It's just a soft rubber, as you know, and just not really good for going off-road. I went with the SW Motech EVO foot pegs. Now the reason that I did that is because they're fully adjustable. You have, I believe, 17 millimeters top to bottom or front to back, so you have almost 2 centimeters to play with in either direction. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're looking at a small bike this size, a little bit really makes a difference in the positioning of the controls. So you can move it forward or back, up or down. I've moved it down as far as it'll go, just to give me a little bit more room. I'm just under 6 feet, so I don't feel cramped on the bike, but that little bit of room is nice, and also to get under the shifter, a little closer to the brake. The other thing that I really like about this is that there's a little bolt at the bottom that you can undo, and this rubber insert comes right out, so you have a nice grippy spiked metal surface. So I leave the rubber in, just I don't want to chew my boots up until I need to, but if you take that out, you'll have a huge amount of grip. I don't see you slipping off that at all. I've been very happy with those as well. Now at the front of the bike, I've made several modifications for my comfort. So one that you probably wouldn't notice just looking at the bike, but it's made a huge difference for me, is the handlebars. I found the stock handlebars just kind of had a weird cant where they kind of twisted my wrist up this way, just enough to make it uncomfortable. Again, coming from a sport bike background, I'm used to mostly kind of clip-ons, which have your arms kind of in like this. I found that really comfortable, and the stock ones on this bike were almost the exact opposite, where they twisted up this way. I found that extremely uncomfortable. I put a set of Renthal fat bars on it, and they're fairly straight, and what a difference it's made. It's extremely comfortable. I wanted, if possible, to get something a little higher and back for when I'm standing up off-road. With the length of the stock cables for like the clutch and the brake and everything, you're really limited in how much movement you have without starting to get into changing all that stuff. So happy with the Renthal fat bars. They just made enough of a change that I find it really comfortable, whether sitting down riding or standing up. Then I had to get a set of Barkbusters, obviously, to protect everything. And thank God I did, because I actually have dropped the bike already at a very slow speed. First time in like 10 or 15 years. It's really embarrassing. You'll probably see the scuff here. But they've already paid for themselves, so can't recommend Barkbusters enough. So you'll notice that because I changed the handlebars, I couldn't get the Barkbusters that fitted the OEM bars, so I had to get a generic set. because of that, I ran into two fitment issues. One was on the left-hand side, using the normal mount, there was interference with the cable, so I had to actually drill a new hole in order to get that to fit. Second issue that I had was the bars on the end of the levers were interfering, and I couldn't actually pull the clutch or the brake in, so I had to chop off the end of the levers. I was going to get new levers, but realistically, with the handguards, you know, I'm not too worried about them breaking off, and the brake is 5-way adjustable anyway, so I'm just going to leave them. I'm fine. It might look a little ugly with the chopped off duct tape on the end, but I'm happy enough with it. Then the other thing that I did was I wanted to get a chain oiler. I've been really bad in the past with maintenance on the bikes, specifically chain maintenance. I tend to ride them hard and put them away wet, so I wanted to make sure that I was going to take care of this and not have any issues on maintenance with the chain. So I got, after a lot of research, a Cobrra oiler. I like simple, well-designed, effective things, so I didn't want anything overly complicated, definitely nothing electric. This is a really ingenious, super simple design. There's just a little reservoir that bolts onto your handlebars. Fill it up with oil, and then you just twist this 90 degrees whenever you want to oil the chain, like 500 kilometers or after every time you wash it. I think it said you rotate it 90 degrees and it'll drip out oil for about 3 minutes, and you get quite a while out of it. I haven't had to refill it yet. So you just turn it, and I think it just forces pressure onto the fluid and just slowly pours it out the bottom. So really ingenious, simple little product. I really like it. Now the other thing that I did was put a set of heated grips on it. Up until this point, I've usually been a fair weather rider, but the odd times that I do get caught out in the cold and in the rain, I think that heated grips would make a big difference. With the protection from the Barkbusters and heated grips, maybe I'll ride it through the winter. So the other thing that I put in was the 12-volt adapter. There's a blank from the factory, so I just called Honda and ordered the 12-volt outlet. Initially, they actually sent me the wrong one, so I spent half an hour trying to figure out, you know, why won't this connect? This doesn't look like the same connector. How can I not figure this out? Sure enough, after I called them, they'd sent me the wrong part. Once I swapped it out, it was really easy to install. Just feeds right into the factory wiring harness, plugs in where the blank is, nice and simple. I have a adapter also where I can charge my phone with a USB in it. Now, one of the problems most of us that own this bike have faced is that the stock windscreen just doesn't do a very good job of deflecting the air. I did make a separate video about it, but long story short, I just bought a little $30 windscreen adapter, generic, not brand name, not model specific, and it's completely solved the buffeting issue, like completely. I don't have any problems with wind. I can ride with my visor up at 100. It's amazing what such a tiny little cheap fix did. That's probably the best bang for buck modification that I've done so far. Now, as far as the rally raid stuff went, again, I know there's probably gonna be some haters in the comments saying, you know, why did you do it? It doesn't make sense from a financial point of view. You know, with the 2019 that has the bigger 19-inch front wheel and the longer travel suspension, there's no need for it. Why don't you just buy a Tenere T7, blah, 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 whatever. I hear you. I can't say you're 100% wrong. I do have my reasons for it, and I think that'll become clear as time goes on. But I wanted to do it to make the bike exactly what I was looking for, and I've been really impressed with what it's done. It's not a cheap kit, but it makes such a really big difference. So the front forks from the factory, for this generation, they have increased the travel. I think it was 2 inches or something like that. But really, they just put a big giant plastic spacer into it. So it's evident when you take the forks apart, the difference in quality between what's in there and what went back in. The Rally Raid spring is not progressively wound, so it's got the same spring rate throughout the whole spring. On the factory Honda spring, you'll see that it's a progressively wound spring, so it's fairly plush, but you'll hit a certain point in the travel and it just firms up, and that's where you start getting that really jarring feeling in the handlebars and any sort of rough stuff. The Rally Raid kit had a much nicer much higher quality damper. It had a shim stack, and it has the longer spring to eliminate the plastic spacer in it. and it's got the same spring rate throughout. So it's actually, initially, it's a little bit plusher, and it's a little bit of a softer ride that doesn't firm up immediately. It's got more travel to it, and it doesn't just jar up like the Honda one does. So I'm really impressed with that. That's done a really good job. I've taken it on a like 80-kilometer trail ride that I really think I would have struggled on the stock suspension. The other thing that it came with is it came with the brand new rear shock. The rear shock has a remote preload adjuster, as well as a remote reservoir here, where you can adjust the high speed and low speed damping. I haven't adjusted the damping yet. I do plan on playing around with that. You'll notice there's a little bit of black duct tape on there. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it was chewing up the back of my waterproof boot. So until I can move the clamps around, just to make them not chew it as I move my foot around. So overall, with the front and rear suspension, it's made a massive difference in the handling of the bike. Not just off-road, even on-road. Like, it soaks up the bumps a little bit better, but it also gives me a little bit more feedback. I don't have the sort of pogo when you fling it going in a straight line. If you flick it side to side, the stock suspension almost turned into a bit of a pogo. This doesn't do that anymore. And then off-road, it's just night and day. I haven't had it kind of bottom out. If I went over like washboard stuff on the stock suspension, you'd start feeling it. It wouldn't bottom out, but you'd hit that progressive part of the spring in the front, and it'd get really jarring. And the back would sometimes bang. I haven't had any of that. I was even taking it over like little sandy whoops and everything, and it just did a phenomenal job. And then the other part of the Rally Raid conversion was the spoked tubeless wheels. I wanted to get a spoked wheel just because the cast wheels, they're a lot more prone to catastrophic failure, right? Like, you're not going to be able to hammer a cast wheel back into shape. It's just if something were to go wrong with the rim when you're out far from help, you're gonna have a lot tougher time with the cast wheel to get going again. And then I also went with tubeless. Again, we could debate that endlessly. Other people will definitely disagree, along with my father. But I like the idea of the tubeless because if I'm out on the trail or out far from help and I get a puncture, I don't want to have to worry about getting the bike up, getting the wheels off, taking the tire off, patching a tube, getting it back in, hoping it all works. Just carry a little tire repair kit that I have, and you're fine. If you get a blowout or something like that, you're just gonna have to deal with it. But I definitely think the tubeless will make my life easier in the long run. So far, that's Molly the Mule. I have ordered luggage. Unfortunately, it's been on order for about 6 months, just with the COVID world. What are you gonna do? Hopefully when I get that, I'll be able to do a trip or two. So if you have any questions or anything I can help with, please put them down below, let me know. I'm really new to this whole making videos on YouTube thing, but one of the things I found really cool and kind of rewarding is when people will ask you for questions or advice or how did you do this, whatever, and you can help them. It's just kind of a neat feeling. And I've also had people respond and make suggestions that have helped me out. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.